Rain has a way of washing away the
this.
evidence of human
Get
misery.
away from him!
It sluices down through the gutters, carrying with it the cigarette butts and fast food wrappers and forgotten dreams of those who have slipped through the cracks of a society too busy to notice them falling. In Portland, Oregon, the November rains come with a particular cruelty. They do not simply fall. They assault. They penetrate. They find every gap in every layer of clothing and settle into the marrow of the bones like unwanted tenants who have no intention of ever leaving. On this night, the rain hammered against the cracked pavement of a narrow alley behind a dive bar called the Rusty Nail with the relentless fury of a drummer who had lost all sense of rhythm. The neon signs from the main street bled through the darkness, casting an eerie crimson glow across the wet brick walls. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm wailed its futile protest against the night. Somewhere closer, the heavy bass of classic rock music thumped through the walls of the bar, muffled but persistent like a heartbeat that refused to stop. And in the deepest recess of that alley, wedged between a row of rusted dumpsters and a concrete wall stained with decades of neglect, a young woman sat perfectly still. She had learned long ago that stillness was survival. Movement attracted attention. Attention attracted trouble. Trouble attracted pain. Her name was Wren Gallagher, and she had been invisible for exactly 4 years, 2 months, and 17 days. Not that she was counting. Time had ceased to have any real meaning the night she had crawled out of a second-story window in Spokane, Washington, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a torn canvas duffel bag containing everything she owned in this world. She had been 18 years old, a legal adult, free according to the state that had shuffled her from foster home to foster home since the age of 7 to make her own way in the world. What the state had failed to mention was that freedom without resources was just another word for abandonment. Wren pulled her oversized jacket tighter around her shoulders, feeling the dampness that had already seeped through the worn fabric. The jacket had once belonged to someone else. She had found it 3 winters ago in a donation bin behind a church in Salem. It was 4 sizes too large, the original color faded to an indeterminate gray, and it smelled permanently of mildew and old cigarettes no matter how many times she washed it in gas station sinks. But it was hers. In a life where ownership was a foreign concept, the jacket represented something approaching stability. She was 22 years old now, though she looked both younger and older, depending on the light. Younger because malnutrition had kept her face gaunt and her frame barely touching 90 pounds. Older because her eyes held the kind of weariness that usually took decades to accumulate. They were pale blue, those eyes, the color of winter sky just before a storm, and they missed nothing. This particular alley had been her home for the past 8 months. She had chosen it with the careful deliberation of a general selecting a battlefield. The positioning was strategic. The row of dumpsters provided cover from the street. The exhaust vents from the bar's kitchen pumped out a steady stream of warm air that kept the frostbite at bay on the coldest nights. The staff threw out perfectly edible food at predictable intervals. And most importantly, the clientele of the Rusty Nail were the kind of people who minded their own business. The bar was a known hangout for the local chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Wren had learned this within her first week of occupying the alley. She had watched them come and go, these large men in leather vests adorned with patches and insignia she did not fully understand. They rode machines that sounded like thunder and moved through the world with the absolute certainty of predators who knew they sat at the top of the food chain. They were loud. They were intimidating, and they operated by their own set of rules that existed entirely outside the jurisdiction of polite society. Wren did not fear them. She did not fear much of anything anymore. Fear required emotional investment, and she had long ago spent all the emotional currency she possessed. What she practiced instead was caution. Street logic dictated clear protocols when it came to outlaw bikers. You did not look at them directly. You did not speak to them unless spoken to. You did not cross their path, and you most certainly did not insert yourself into their business. They existed in a parallel universe, and Wren was more than content to observe that universe from the peripheral vision of her own. On this night, she had already eaten. A kitchen worker named Miguel, who had never once acknowledged her existence despite seeing her nearly every night, had left a paper bag beside the dumpster containing half a roast beef sandwich and an untouched serving of French fries. It was a feast by her standards. She had consumed it slowly, savoring each bite, making it last because you never knew when the next meal would come. Now she sat with her back against the warm brick, her sleeping bag pulled up to her chest, waiting for the bar to close so she could sleep without interruption. The rain continued its assault. The music continued its muffled thumping, and Wren continued her vigil, watching the alley with the patient alertness of a small animal that has survived by never letting its guard down. The heavy steel door at the rear of the bar slammed open at exactly 2:14 in the morning. Wren shrank back into her alcove, her body responding to the sudden noise with the instinctive self-preservation she had cultivated over 4 years of hard lessons. She held her breath, making herself as small as possible, becoming part of the shadows. A massive figure stepped out into the rain. He was one of the bikers. She recognized the cut immediately, the sleeveless denim vest that served as a uniform and a declaration of allegiance. Even from this distance, even in the dim crimson glow of the neon signs, she could see the winged skull logo on the back. The Death Head, the most recognizable symbol in the outlaw motorcycle world. Above it arched a rocker patch that she knew read the name of the club, and below it another rocker identifying the Portland chapter. The man was enormous, not merely tall, but constructed on a scale that seemed designed for a different era, a time when physical intimidation was the primary currency of survival. His shoulders were broad enough to block a doorway. His arms, visible below the cut, were covered in intricate tattoos that disappeared into the darkness. His beard was thick and dark, streaked with the first hints of gray, and it glistened with rain as he stepped further into the alley. He fumbled in his pocket and produced a cigarette, sheltering it from the rain as he struck a lighter. The brief flare illuminated a face that had seen too much. Deep lines carved around eyes that were surprisingly thoughtful for a man of such imposing physical presence. A nose that had been broken at least twice. A jaw that looked like it had been designed to absorb punishment. The cigarette caught and the man exhaled a plume of smoke that mixed with the mist and disappeared into the night. He seemed in no particular hurry, apparently content to stand in the freezing rain and finish his smoke before riding off into the darkness. Wren watched him from the shadows, her heartbeat gradually slowing as she realized he was simply leaving. The bar must have closed early, or perhaps he had stayed behind to settle a tab. Either way, his presence in the alley was temporary. He would smoke his cigarette, climb onto the massive motorcycle she could see parked near the mouth of the alley, and thunder off into the night. And she would be alone again, which was exactly how she preferred things. But the street had other plans. They came from the opposite end of the alley, 4 figures emerging from the darkness with the predatory silence of wolves who had caught the scent of blood. Wren saw them before the biker did. Her position in the recessed alcove gave her a vantage point that encompassed the entire alley, and her eyes, long accustomed to reading the darkness, picked out the movement immediately. The figures moved in formation, spreading out as they approached, boxing in their target with practiced efficiency. They wore dark hoodies with the hoods pulled up, bandanas covering the lower halves of their faces. One of them carried something long and heavy, a crowbar, Wren realized with a cold spike of recognition. Another had a chain wrapped around his fist, a heavy padlock dangling at the end like a medieval flail. Every instinct Wren possessed screamed at her to close her eyes, to turn away, to pull the sleeping bag over her head and pretend she did not exist the same way she had pretended for 4 years. This was not her business. These were not her people. The man by the door was a stranger, and more than that, he was a Hell's Angel. A member of a world that operated so far outside her own experience that she might as well have been watching events unfold on a movie screen. The biker's back was turned. He was still focused on his cigarette, on the keys in his pocket on the motorcycle, waiting to carry him away from this miserable night. He did not hear the footsteps approaching behind him, the sound masked by the relentless drumming of the rain. Wren's hands clenched into fists beneath her sleeping bag. She could see what was about to happen with the horrible clarity of someone watching a car accident in slow motion. The lead attacker was within striking distance. Now the crowbar raised high above his head, aimed directly at the base of the biker's skull. And then the lead attacker passed through a shaft of crimson light from the neon signs, and Wren's blood turned to ice. She knew that face. Even with the bandana covering his nose and mouth, even with the hood pulled low over his forehead, she knew those eyes. Small and mean, set too close together, burning with the particular cruelty of a man who enjoyed causing pain. She knew the way he moved, the confident swagger of someone who believed the world owed him something, and took payment in flesh and fear. Harlan Slade. The name surfaced from the depths of memories she had tried so hard to bury. 2 years ago, before she had found this alley, before she had learned which corners of Portland were safe and which would get you killed, Wren had made the mistake of sleeping in the wrong doorway. It was a warehouse district on the east side, and she had not known that the territory belonged to Harlan's crew. They had found her on her second night, 3 of them including Harlan. He had explained the situation with a casual brutality that still made her stomach clench. This was his territory. Anyone who wanted to sleep here paid a protection fee. She had no money, so Harlan had taken payment in another form. She remembered the kicks, the way his boot had connected with her ribs while she curled into a fetal position on the concrete trying to protect her head. She remembered the laughter of his companions, the absolute lack of mercy in their eyes. She remembered crawling away afterward, broken and bleeding, swearing to herself that she would never again be caught unaware. And now, here he was, 2 years later, about to bring that same crowbar down on the skull of a man who did not even know death was inches away. The choice crystallized in Wren's mind with a terrible clarity. She could remain silent. She could watch this stranger die and tell herself it was not her responsibility, that survival meant looking out for yourself and no one else. It was the smart play. It was what 4 years of homelessness had taught her. You do not get involved. You do not attract attention. You do not make yourself a target, but something else rose up from deep within her, something she thought the streets had beaten out of her long ago. A memory sharp and jagged as broken glass. A memory of being cornered in that warehouse doorway, of screaming for help while people walked by on the other side of the street and pretended not to hear. A memory of learning exactly what it felt like when the world decided you were not worth saving. Harlan's arms reached the apex of their arc. The crowbar gleamed dull and wet in the neon light. In another fraction of a second, it would come crashing down and the biker would drop to the pavement with his skull caved in, and Harlan would steal his colors and disappear into the night, and no one would ever know that Wren Gallagher had been a witness. She could not be a ghost tonight. The scream tore out of her throat before she consciously decided to make a sound. It was raw and desperate 4 years of silence, exploding into a single word that echoed off the brick walls of the alley like a gunshot. Behind you, the biker moved with reflexes that spoke of a lifetime of violence, and he pivoted on his heel, cigarette flying from his lips, massive hands already coming up to defend himself. The warning had given him perhaps half a second of preparation, and for a man of his experience, half a second was enough to mean the difference between life and death. The crowbar that had been aimed at the base of his skull instead caught him across the shoulder. It was still a devastating blow. Wren heard the meaty thunk of metal against flesh, heard the biker grunt in pain as the impact spun him sideways. Blood immediately began to bloom through the fabric of his shirt, dark and wet. But he was alive, and he was now very much aware that he was under attack. The alley erupted into chaos. The biker caught the first attacker with a right hook that seemed to travel from somewhere near his hip and terminate at the man's jaw with the force of a freight train. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the alley, and the attacker crumpled to the pavement like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He did not get up. But there were 3 more, and they swarmed the wounded biker with the desperate ferocity of men who understood that failure was not an option. One of them swung the chain, catching the biker across the ribs. He roared in pain, but grabbed the chain before the attacker could retract it, using it to pull the man forward and deliver a headbutt that split the man's forehead open in a spray of crimson. 2 down. But the biker was bleeding heavily from his shoulder, and his movements were beginning to slow. The third attacker landed a kick to the back of his knee, and Wren heard something pop. The biker dropped to one knee, splashing into a puddle, struggling to maintain his balance. And Harlan Slade, who had hung back during the initial exchange, circled around behind the kneeling man with the patience of a predator who knew his prey was weakening. The crowbar rose again. Wren did not think. Thinking would have stopped her. Thinking would have reminded her that she weighed 90 pounds and had no weapon, and was about to throw herself at a man who had beaten her half to death 2 years ago without breaking a sweat. Thinking was a luxury for people who had something to lose. She launched herself from behind the dumpsters like a small, ragged missile. Her shoulder connected with Harlan's side just as the crowbar began its downward arc. The impact was not enough to knock him down. She was too small, too light, too fragile against his bulk. But it was enough to throw off his aim. The crowbar whistled past the biker's skull, missing by inches, and struck the pavement with a shower of sparks. Harlan stumbled sideways, caught off guard by an attack from an entirely unexpected direction. He looked down at the small figure clinging to his jacket, and recognition flared in those mean little eyes. "What the hell?" His voice was muffled by the bandana, but Ren heard the disbelief clearly. "The little rat from the warehouse." She did not answer. She could not answer. All of her energy was focused on holding on preventing him from getting another clean swing at the kneeling biker, on buying time for a man she did not know, because it was the right thing to do, and she was so tired of living in a world where no one did the right thing. Harlan's elbow caught her in the face. The world exploded into white light and searing pain. Ren felt her nose break, felt the hot gush of blood down her chin, felt her grip on his jacket loosen as her body tried to process the trauma. But she did not let go. Even as her vision swam and her ears rang, she tightened her arms around his torso, digging her fingernails into the fabric with everything she had. "Get off me, you filthy piece of garbage." Harlan reached back, grabbed a fistful of her jacket, and tore her away from him, like she weighed nothing at all. He flung her to the ground, and Ren hit the wet pavement hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Before she could even attempt to curl into a protective position, his boot connected with her ribs. The crack was audible, a dry, brittle sound like a branch snapping under too much weight. Pain beyond anything she had ever experienced lanced through her chest, and a thin, desperate wheeze escaped her lips as she tried and failed to draw breath. She felt something shift inside her, something that was not supposed to shift, and she knew with horrible certainty that this was worse than the beating 2 years ago. This was the kind of damage that killed people. Harlan drew his foot back for another kick. But those precious seconds that Ren had bought with her broken body were all the biker needed. The man they called Forge rose from his kneel like a creature from nightmare. Despite the blood pouring from his shoulder, despite the damage to his leg, despite the overwhelming odds, he moved with a primal fury that transcended physical limitation. He caught Harlan by the throat before the second kick could land, massive fingers wrapping entirely around the younger man's neck. Harlan's eyes went wide. The crowbar clattered from his suddenly nerveless fingers. He clawed at the hand, crushing his windpipe, but it was like trying to pry open a steel vise. Forge slammed him backward into the brick wall with enough force to crack the mortar. Harlan's head bounced off the bricks and his eyes rolled back. His body went limp. Forge held him there for a long moment, pinned against the wall, before finally releasing his grip and letting the unconscious man slide down to the wet pavement. The fourth attacker, the one who had not yet engaged, took one look at the devastation before him and made the only intelligent decision of his life. He turned and ran his footsteps, splashing through the puddles as he disappeared into the fog at the end of the alley. Silence descended, or rather the relative silence of a Portland night filled with the drumming of rain and the distant wail of sirens, and the ragged breathing of the two people left conscious in the alley. Forge leaned against the wall, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his chest heaving. He spat a mouthful of blood onto the pavement and slowly turned his attention to the small, crumpled figure lying near the dumpsters. Ren could not move. Each breath was an exercise in agony, a wet, rattling sound that she knew instinctively was very bad. She could taste copper on her lips. The edges of her vision were going dark, the world narrowing to a tunnel that seemed to be getting smaller by the second. She heard heavy footsteps splashing through the puddles, felt a presence looming over her, saw through the haze of pain and encroaching darkness a massive bearded face looking down at her with an expression she could not quite identify. "Hey!" The voice was deep and rough, scraped raw from years of cigarettes and shouting over the roar of motorcycle engines. "Hey, stay with me. Keep your eyes open." She felt hands on her, gentle hands surprisingly so for their size. They brushed the wet hair away from her face, checked her pulse, pressed something soft against the wound on her forehead. She flinched at the touch, an instinctive response to human contact that had rarely brought anything but pain. "Easy." The voice was softer now, gentler. "Easy, kid. Nobody's going to hurt you. Not anymore." She wanted to laugh. Everyone hurt her. That was the fundamental truth she had learned in 22 years of existence. The foster parents who were supposed to protect her, the system that was supposed to save her, the streets that were supposed to be her refuge. Everyone eventually hurt her. but the hands remained gentle, and the voice kept talking, a low, steady rumble that cut through the pain and the fear and the encroaching darkness. "What's your name?" It took her 3 tries to form the word. Her lips felt thick and uncooperative, and each syllable sent fresh waves of agony through her shattered ribs. "Ren. Ren." The man repeated the name like he was committing it to memory. "I'm Declan. They call me Forge. You saved my life, Ren. You hear me. That crowbar was coming for my skull and you stopped it." She wanted to tell him that she had not stopped anything, that Harlan had still beaten her, that she was still dying in an alley behind a bar that did not even know her name, that nothing had changed and nothing ever would. But the words would not come. The tunnel was getting narrower. The darkness was creeping in from the edges, soft and inviting, promising an end to the pain. "No, no, stay with me." The voice was urgent now. She felt something heavy and warm settle over her body. A jacket. His jacket, she realized. The sacred cut with the death head patch that no Hell's Angel would ever willingly let leave their possession. He was draping it over her like a blanket, shielding her from the rain and the cold. She heard him fumbling with something. A phone. The soft electronic chirp of a number being dialed. And then his voice, again harder now, the gentleness replaced with command. "Ezra, it's Forge. I'm in the alley behind the nail." A pause. "Yeah, I got jumped. 4 of them. Tried to take my cut." Another pause, longer this time. "Listen to me. I'm busted up bad, but that's not why I'm calling. There's a girl, a homeless kid, looks like she hasn't eaten a real meal in months. She threw herself between me and a crowbar. Took a beating meant for me." His voice cracked slightly on the last words. "She's bleeding out, Ezra. I think she's got a punctured lung. I need the crash truck. 5 minutes, and bring the doc." Ren heard the response only as a tinny murmur from the phone's speaker. But she saw Forge's face change, saw something shift in those weathered eyes. Relief, maybe, or something deeper. "Copy that, and Ezra. This girl is club business now. Anyone who touches her answers to me." He ended the call and turned his full attention back to her. The hand that was not pressing against her forehead found her fingers cold and fragile as bird bones and wrapped around them completely. "Help is coming. Ren, 4 minutes, maybe less. I need you to stay awake. Can you do that for me?" She could not. The darkness was too heavy, the pain too consuming. She felt herself slipping, drifting toward a place where nothing hurt anymore. "Tell me something." The voice was desperate now. "Tell me anything. Where are you from? How long have you been on the streets?" The questions reached her through the phone, anchoring her to consciousness by the thinnest of threads. "Spokane." The word was barely a whisper. "Foster care. 4 years out here." 4 years. She felt his hand tighten around hers. Jesus Christ. 4 years on the streets, and you still had enough heart to save a stranger. She wanted to tell him that it was not hard. That it was simply the memory of being ignored when she had needed help the most. That she had not saved him out of courage, but out of the desperate need to believe that the world could be different from what she had experienced. But the darkness would not be denied any longer. It wrapped around her like a blanket, soft and warm and final. The last thing she heard before consciousness fled was the distant thunder of motorcycle engines converging on the alley. The crash truck arrived in 3 minutes and 47 seconds, followed by 6 Harley-Davidsons and 2 black SUVs that completely blocked the mouth of the alley. The rain had not let up, but the men who poured out of the vehicles seemed not to notice the cold or the wet. They moved with the grim efficiency of soldiers responding to a battlefield emergency, their faces set in hard lines, their eyes scanning the darkness for additional threats. Ezra Thorne was the first out of the lead SUV. He was a tall man, lean, where Forge was massive, with a silver beard, meticulously trimmed, and eyes that had the cold, calculating quality of a chess master who was always thinking 5 moves ahead. He had led the Portland chapter for 11 years, navigating the treacherous waters of outlaw motorcycle culture with a combination of intelligence, brutality, and an absolute commitment to the brotherhood that had earned him the respect of every Hell's Angel on the West Coast. He took in the scene in a single sweeping glance. 2 of Harlan's crew unconscious on the ground, one with a virus that would need to be wired shut, the other with a head wound that would leave a permanent scar. Harlan himself slumped against the wall, breathing but clearly not going anywhere. Forge leaning against the opposite wall, blood soaking through his shirt, his face pale but his eyes fierce with an emotion Ezra had rarely seen in his old friend. And on the ground, wrapped in Forge's cut like a child in a blanket, a young woman who looked like she might weigh 90 pounds soaking wet. "Doc," Ezra called over his shoulder. "Priority one, the girl." A man in his 50s pushed through the crowd of bikers carrying a heavy medical bag. He had been a combat medic in another life before the war, and the disillusionment and the gradual slide into a world where his skills were still valued, but the uniform was different. He knelt beside Wren, his hands quick and sure as he assessed her injuries. Broken ribs at least 3. Possible pneumothorax, facial trauma. She's lost blood and she's severely hypothermic. He looked up at Ezra, his expression grim. She needs a hospital. Now, if that lung collapses, she's got maybe 20 minutes. Get her in the truck. Vincent's is 10 minutes out. Call ahead, tell them we're coming. 2 bikers stepped forward, but Forge stopped them with a raised hand. I've got her. Despite his own injuries, he bent down and gathered Wren into his arms with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man of his size. She weighed almost nothing. He could feel her ribs beneath the wet fabric of her jacket, could count the vertebrae of her spine. She was so fragile, so impossibly, heartbreakingly fragile, and she had thrown herself between him and death without a moment's hesitation. He carried her to the SUV and climbed into the back, cradling her against his chest. The doc slid in beside him, already preparing an IV, murmuring instructions to the driver. The engine roared to life, and the SUV tore out of the alley, leaving the unconscious attackers for the prospects to deal with. Ezra watched them go, then turned to survey the aftermath. Barrett, his vice president, approached with Harlan Slade's limp body slung over his shoulder like a sack of garbage. "What do you want done with this one?" "Bag him. Take him to the warehouse. I want him awake when I have questions." Barrett nodded and carried Harlan toward one of the other vehicles. Ezra looked down at the wet pavement, at the pools of blood that the rain was slowly washing into the gutters. His mind was already processing the implications of what had happened tonight. Someone had tried to jump a patched member of the Hells Angels. That alone demanded retaliation. But the manner of the attack, the cowardice of striking from behind, the intent to take Forge's colors as a trophy, all of that elevated the offense to something that required more than simple street justice. And then there was the girl. Ezra had been in the life for over 30 years. He had seen acts of violence that would give nightmares to normal people. He had committed some of them himself. But in all those years, he had rarely seen genuine sacrifice. The kind of sacrifice that asked nothing in return, that risked everything for a stranger, that was so pure in its motivation that it left no room for cynicism or doubt. A homeless girl, barely more than skin and bones, had thrown herself in front of a crowbar to save a man she had never met. In the rigid, honor-bound world of the outlaw motorcycle club, that kind of act created a debt. Not a casual debt easily discharged with a few $100s and a handshake. A blood debt. The kind that lasted until one party or the other stopped breathing. Ezra pulled out his phone and began making calls. The emergency room at St. Vincent Medical Center was accustomed to unusual situations. It was a level 1 trauma center in a city that had its share of violence, and the staff had learned to treat first and ask questions later. But nothing in their experience had prepared them for the convoy that descended upon their doors at 2:47 in the morning. The black SUV screeched to a halt directly in front of the emergency entrance, ignoring the clearly marked ambulance bays. Before the security guards could respond, the back door flew open and a massive blood-soaked man emerged carrying an unconscious young woman in his arms. "I need a doctor!" Forge bellowed, his voice echoing through the sterile corridors. "Right now, she's got broken ribs and a punctured lung, and if someone doesn't help her in the next 30 seconds, I'm going to start breaking things." Nurses rushed forward with a gurney. They transferred Wren from Forge's arms, shouting medical terminology as they assessed her condition. Within moments, she was being wheeled toward the trauma bay, a doctor already running alongside the gurney barking orders. Forge tried to follow, but a security guard stepped into his path. A young man probably fresh out of training with no real understanding of the forces he was attempting to impede. "Sir, you can't go back there. Are you family?" Forge looked down at the guard with an expression that made the younger man's face go pale. "That girl," Forge said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble, "is the only reason I'm still breathing. You're going to step a seat and let me make sure she keeps breathing, or I'm going to walk right through you." The guard opened his mouth to respond, But whatever he was going to say died in his throat, because behind Forge, filling the emergency room lobby with the smell of leather and the weight of barely contained violence, were 15 more men wearing the same patches. They did not speak. They did not make threats. They simply stood there, a wall of muscle and ink and absolute conviction. The guard stepped aside. Forge followed the gurney as far as the trauma bay doors, where a harried-looking nurse finally managed to stop him. "Sir, please. We need room to work. We'll take care of her, I promise. But you need to let us do our jobs." It was the gentleness in her voice that finally got through to him. Not the authority, not the rules, but the genuine compassion in her eyes. She was not trying to keep him out. She was trying to keep Wren alive. "What's her name?" the nurse asked. "For the records." "Wren." Forge's voice cracked slightly. "Wren Gallagher. And you are her family." The nurse did not question it. In her years of working the night shift, she had learned that family came in many forms. She nodded once and disappeared through the swinging doors, leaving Forge standing alone in the corridor. He did not remain alone for long. Within minutes, the waiting room had transformed into a staging area. Bikers filled every available seat and lined the walls, standing in silent vigil. More arrived every hour as word spread through the encrypted channels that served as the club's communication network. By dawn, the parking lot was a sea of chrome and leather. Over 50 motorcycles from the Portland chapter and surrounding charters filled the spaces normally reserved for visitors. The riders gathered in small groups, drinking coffee from the hospital cafeteria, speaking in low voices, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. Security was quietly reinforced. The hospital administrator, roused from his bed by frantic calls from the night staff, arrived to find his facility essentially occupied by an army of outlaw bikers. He considered calling the police. Then he considered the potential consequences of that decision. Then he went back to bed and resolved to deal with the situation in the morning. Inside of the trauma bay, the doctors fought for Wren's life. The punctured lung was the immediate crisis. They inserted a chest tube to relieve the pressure, then worked to stabilize her broken ribs. The malnutrition complicated everything. Her body had so few reserves to draw on, so little cushion against the trauma it had endured. Her blood pressure dropped twice, and twice they brought it back, refusing to lose her. The surgery took 4 hours. When the lead surgeon finally emerged, still wearing his blood-stained scrubs, he found the waiting room packed with hard-faced men who fell utterly silent the moment he appeared. He had never felt so many eyes on him at once. It was like being the focus of a pack of wolves. "She's stable," he announced, and felt the collective tension in the room drop by several degrees. "The lung has been repaired and we've set her ribs. She's severely malnourished, which will slow her recovery significantly. We've induced a coma to give her body time to heal." "Is she going to make it?" The question came from a massive man with a bandaged shoulder who had refused all treatment until the girl was out of surgery. The surgeon hesitated. He believed in honesty, but he also believed in hope. "She's young and she's a fighter. The next 48 hours are critical, but if she makes it through, her chances are good." Forge nodded slowly. "When can I see her?" "She's being moved to the ICU. Only family is allowed during visiting hours, but given the circumstances, I'm sure we can make an arrangement." The surgeon retreated to the safety of the operating theater, leaving the bikers to their vigil. Ezra Thorne, who had arrived an hour into the surgery, approached Forge. "Talk to me. What happened in that alley?" Forge told him everything. The attack from behind the warning cry that had saved his life, the tiny young woman who had thrown herself at Harlan Slade without a weapon or a plan or any reasonable expectation of survival. He told him about finding her afterward broken and bleeding, about the way she had flinched at his touch, about the 4 years of homelessness she had mentioned before losing consciousness. Ezra listened without interruption. When Forge finished, the president of the Portland chapter was silent for a long moment. "You say she knew the leader, the one who swung the crowbar?" "She recognized him, called him a name before she passed out. Harlan something. Said he'd beaten her before 2 years ago." Ezra nodded slowly. The pieces were falling into place. "Barrett's got him at the warehouse. Says his name is Harlan Slade. Small-time thug, runs an extortion and theft crew on the east side. We've had run-ins with his type before, but nothing that warranted attention." "It warrants attention now." "Yes." Ezra's eyes were cold. It does. But first we take care of the girl. Everything else can wait until we know she's going to pull through. The next 4 days were a blur of antiseptic smells and mechanical beeping and the quiet shuffling of nurses going about their rounds. Forge remained at the hospital sleeping in the plastic chairs of the ICU waiting room, accepting only the most cursory treatment of his own injuries. The other brothers rotated in and out, maintaining a constant presence that the hospital staff had stopped trying to regulate. On the morning of the 5th day, Wren Gallagher opened her eyes. Consciousness returned in fragments. The sound of a heart monitor steady and insistent, the antiseptic smell of hospital sheets, the unfamiliar sensation of warmth of being dry and clean and lying on something soft. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was dead. Then the pain hit a dull, throbbing ache in her chest that flared to sharp agony when she tried to move, and she knew that the afterlife, whatever it might be, would not feel like this. She was in a hospital room, private judging by the single bed and the comfortable armchair in the corner. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of gold across the white linens. An IV was attached to her arm, delivering fluids to a body that had been running on empty for far too long. And in the armchair, taking up far more space than the furniture was designed to accommodate, sat the biker from the alley. He looked different in the daylight, older somehow and more human. The savage fury she had glimpsed in the alley was gone, replaced by something that might have been concern. His shoulder was bandaged, his arm in a sling, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "Hey," his voice was rough, tentative. "Easy there. Don't try to move too much." Wren tried to speak, but her throat was sandpaper. He anticipated her need, reaching over to pour water from a plastic pitcher and guiding the straw to her cracked lips. She drank greedily, feeling the cool liquid soothe her parched throat. "Where am I?" The words came out as a croak. "St. Vincent's Hospital. ICU. You've been out for 4 days." 4 days. The information hit her like a physical blow. 4 days meant no panhandling. 4 days meant no food scavenged from dumpsters. 4 days meant her spot behind the bar might have been claimed by someone else. Her sleeping bag might have been stolen. Her entire precarious existence might have collapsed in her absence. She tried to sit up, and the pain in her ribs immediately reminded her why that was a bad idea. "Easy." His hand was on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "You've got 3 broken ribs and a lung that was doing its best to collapse. You're not going anywhere for a while." "My bag." Her voice was thin with panic. "My things. I need—" "Your bag is safe." He pointed to the corner of the room where her tattered canvas duffel sat on a vinyl chair. It looked bizarrely out of place in the sterile hospital environment, a piece of the streets transplanted into a world of clean lines and institutional order. "Nobody touched it. I made sure of that." Wren stared at the bag, then at the man, her mind struggling to process the impossible situation she had awakened into. She was in a private hospital room. Her belongings were intact. A man she had never met before that night in the alley was sitting at her bedside like a concerned relative. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why are you here?" The biker Declan, the one they called Forge, leaned forward in his chair. Up close, his eyes were a deep brown, and there was something in them that she had never expected to see directed at her. Respect. "You don't remember what happened?" "In the alley," she remembered. Fragments, at least. The crowbar, the scream, the feel of Harlan's elbow breaking her nose, the awful crack of her ribs giving way, the darkness closing in. "I remember. I just don't understand why it matters. I didn't stop anything." "He still beat me. You were still hurt." Ford shook his head slowly. "You stopped a crowbar from caving in my skull. That swing was meant to kill me, and you put yourself in its path. Without your warning, without those few seconds you bought me, I'd be in the morgue right now instead of sitting here talking to you." Wren looked away. The gratitude in his voice was uncomfortable. She was not accustomed to gratitude. She was accustomed to being ignored, dismissed, stepped over. "I should have done more," she said quietly. "I should have had a weapon or called for help or done something that actually mattered." "You did something that mattered." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "You saw a stranger in trouble, and you risked your life to help. In my world, that means something. It means everything." He reached into his pocket and produced a small photograph slightly crumpled from being carried. He handed it to her. It was a picture of the parking lot outside the hospital. Row upon row of motorcycles gleaming chrome and dark leather stretching across the asphalt as far as the camera could capture. Among them, dozens of men in cuts standing in small groups, faces turned toward the building with expressions of patient vigilance. This was taken yesterday morning, Forge said. 53 bikes, members from Portland, Salem, Eugene Bend. More are coming. Wren stared at the photograph, her hands trembling slightly. I don't understand. In our world, loyalty is the only currency that matters. You showed loyalty to a stranger at the cost of your own blood. That creates a debt, a blood debt, and the Hells Angels always pay their debts. He took the photograph back, tucking it into his pocket. Your medical bills are paid, all of them. The brothers passed the hat, and every chapter on the West Coast contributed. There's also a bank account that's been set up in your name. He pulled out his phone, navigated to a screen, and showed it to her. A mobile banking app displaying an account summary. Wren Gallagher. Balance $47,832.14. She dropped the phone like it had burned her. I can't, her voice broke. I can't accept that. I don't know those people. I didn't do anything to deserve. You saved my life. Forge picked up the phone and set it on the bedside table. Every man who contributed to that account has been in a situation where he needed someone to have his back. They understand what you did. They want to help. Wren felt tears streaming down her face, hot and unfamiliar. She could not remember the last time she had cried. Years, maybe. Tears were a luxury she could not afford on the streets, a sign of weakness that predators could exploit. But here in this sterile room with its beeping machines and its impossible kindness, the walls she had built around herself began to crack. Forge did not try to stop her tears. He did not offer platitudes or empty comfort. He simply sat with her, a massive tattooed guardian angel in a denim cut, waiting for the storm to pass. When she finally regained control of herself, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, he spoke again. There's something else you need to know. The man who attacked us, Harlan Slade, he got away that night, slipped out during the confusion. Wren felt a chill run through her despite the warmth of the hospital room. She knew Harlan. She knew what he was capable of. And she knew that a man like that would not take kindly to having his attack foiled by a homeless girl. We're looking for it, Forge continued, his voice hardening. Every brother in the Pacific Northwest has his picture and his description. He won't be able to show his face anywhere without us knowing about it. He'll come for me. Wren's voice was barely a whisper. When he finds out I survived, he'll come for me. Forge leaned forward, and the gentle guardian was gone. In his place was something far more dangerous, a predator who had spent his entire life at the top of the food chain. Let him try. You're not alone anymore, Wren. You've got 500 brothers who will burn this city to the ground before they let anyone touch you. The door to the room opened, and another man entered. Tall, lean, with a silver beard and eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they saw. Wren recognized authority when she saw it. This was a man accustomed to being obeyed. She's awake. It was not a question. Ezra, Forge nodded respectfully. Wren, this is Ezra Thorne, president of the Portland chapter. Ezra crossed to the bed, studying Wren with that calculating gaze. She met his eyes without flinching, a lifetime of facing down hostile strangers having taught her that showing fear only invited aggression. Something flickered in Ezra's expression. Approval, perhaps, or recognition. Forge told me what you did, Ezra said. Threw yourself at a man twice your size to save someone you'd never met. That takes a particular kind of courage, or a particular kind of crazy. I'm not brave, Wren replied. I just couldn't watch someone else get hurt while I did nothing. Ezra nodded slowly. In my experience, those two things are closer together than most people realize. He pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. His posture relaxed, but his eyes never leaving her face. Here's the situation. You're under the protection of this club. That means anyone who comes after you answers to us. It means you'll have a place to stay when you leave this hospital, food to eat, money to spend on whatever you need. It means you're not alone anymore. Wren felt the tears threatening again and forced them back. Why, you don't know me. You don't owe me anything. We owe you everything. Ezra's voice was flat matter of fact. Forge is one of our best. He's been a patched member for 15 years, saved more brothers than I can count. If he'd died in that alley, it would have left a hole in this club that might never heal. He leaned forward slightly. But more than that, you did something that most people would never do. You saw trouble and you got involved. You put yourself at risk for a stranger. In a world full of people who look the other way, that makes you rare, and we value rare things. Wren absorbed his words, trying to reconcile them with everything she had learned about the world in 22 years of hard living. People did not help without expecting something in return. Kindness always came with strings attached. Trust was a trap waiting to spring. And yet, these men had sat vigil outside her hospital room for 4 days. They had paid her medical bills without being asked. They had put $47,000 into an account with her name on it, money she had not earned and could never repay. Either they were running an incredibly elaborate con, or they were exactly what they appeared to be, a brotherhood that valued loyalty above all else and recognized it when they saw it. "What happens now?" she asked. Ezra glanced at Forge, then back at her. "Now you heal. Take as long as you need. When you are ready to leave this hospital, we'll have an apartment waiting for you. Fully furnished rent paid for a year. After that, we'll figure out the rest together." And Harlan Slade, Ezra's expression did not change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "That's club business. You don't need to worry about him. He'll be looking for me. He won't stop just because you're involved." "No." A thin smile crossed Ezra's face. "He won't stop, but neither will we. And I promise you, Wren Gallagher, we're much better at this than he is." He rose from the chair and nodded to Forge. "Stay with her. I'll make the calls." "What calls?" Wren asked. Ezra paused at the door. "Every chapter president on the West Coast. Oakland, Seattle, Sacramento, Reno. They've all heard what you did for one of ours. They all want to know when they can meet the girl who saved Forge with nothing but her bare hands." He opened the door and paused. "Rest well, Wren. You're family now, and family takes care of its own." The door closed behind him, leaving Wren alone with Forge. The biker settled back into his chair, seemingly content to resume his vigil. "You should sleep," he said. "Your body needs rest to heal." "I don't understand any of this." Wren's voice was small, bewildered. "Yesterday I was nobody. Less than nobody. I was a ghost that people stumbled over on their way to somewhere else. Now you're telling me I have family?" Forge considered the question for a long moment. "You were never nobody, Wren. You just hadn't found your people yet." He reached over and gently squeezed her hand, careful not to disturb the IV. "Go to sleep. When you wake up, I'll still be here. And tomorrow and the day after that. For as long as you need." Wren wanted to argue, wanted to push back against this impossible kindness, to find the catch, the hidden cost, the inevitable betrayal. But her body was exhausted, her defenses worn thin by 4 days of unconsciousness and a lifetime of vigilance. For the first time in 4 years, she allowed herself to close her eyes without fear. For the first time in 4 years, she slept knowing that someone was watching over her. Outside the window, the November rain continued to fall. But inside the room, wrapped in clean sheets in the fierce, unwavering protection of men she barely knew, Wren Gallagher began to dream of something she had thought lost forever. She dreamed of home, and somewhere across the city in a damp basement that smelled of rust and fear, Harlan Slade sat in a pool of his own blood, contemplating the terrible mistake he had made. The hunt was only beginning. Recovery was not a straight line. It was a jagged, unpredictable journey through valleys of pain and occasional peaks of something approaching normalcy. For Wren Gallagher, the first week after waking was measured not in days, but in small victories. The first time she managed to sit up without assistance. The first solid food that stayed down. The first shower taken with the help of a patient nurse who pretended not to notice the scars that mapped Wren's body like a history of violence written in flesh. The hospital room became her universe. 4 walls painted in institutional beige, a window that looked out over the parking lot where motorcycles came and went like metal pilgrims paying homage at a shrine, and an endless parade of visitors she had never expected to have. Forge was a constant presence. He slept in the uncomfortable vinyl chair, ate meals from the hospital cafeteria, and refused all suggestions that he go home and rest properly. When Wren pointed out that his own injuries needed attention, he simply shrugged his massive shoulders and said that the doc had cleared him for light duty, and watching over her qualified as light duty in his book. Other bikers rotated through in shifts. They brought flowers, which seemed absurd, given their appearance. They brought books, having somehow learned that she liked to read. They brought food from restaurants around the city, smuggling it past the nurses with the practiced ease of men accustomed to operating outside official channels. They spoke to her with a rough gentleness that she found both touching and utterly bewildering. She was not accustomed to being seen. For 4 years, she had cultivated invisibility as a survival mechanism. Now she was the center of attention for an entire organization of outlaw bikers, and she did not know how to process the cognitive dissonance. 3 weeks had passed since Ren woke from her coma. The doctors had warned her that she was pushing too hard, that her body needed more time. But Ren had spent 4 years ignoring what her body needed. She could ignore it a little longer. On that morning, Ren made a decision. She had been listening. In the quiet hours of the night, when the hospital settled into its nocturnal rhythms and the bikers thought she was asleep, they talked. She heard fragments of conversations about the search for Harlan Slade, about leads that had gone cold, and about frustration mounting as the man who had tried to kill one of their own continued to elude them. The club's intelligence network was impressive. They had contacts in bars and tattoo parlors and auto shops across the Pacific Northwest. They had prospects watching bus stations and highway rest stops. They had put out the word through channels that Ren did not fully understand, making it known that Harlan Slade was a marked man. But Harlan had vanished. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Ren knew why. She knew Harlan in ways that these men, for all their street experience, could not. She had lived in his world for 4 years. She understood the logic of the desperate and the hunted, the calculus of survival that governed life on the margins. And she knew where he would run. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest, a weight that grew heavier with each passing day. She could stay silent. She could let the club handle things in their own way in their own time. She could focus on healing and accept the protection they offered and trust that eventually somehow Harlan would be found. But that was not who she was. She had spent 4 years being passive. 4 years letting the world happen to her rather than happening to the world. 4 years accepting that she had no power, no agency, no ability to shape her own destiny. That girl had died in an alley behind a bar called the Rusty Nail. The woman who had woken up in this hospital bed was someone different. Someone who had discovered in a moment of desperate action that she was capable of more than mere survival. She asked Forge to bring Ezra to her room. The president of the Portland chapter arrived within the hour, his silver beard freshly trimmed, his eyes carrying that same calculating intensity she had noticed during their first meeting. He settled into the chair beside her bed with the easy confidence of a man who was accustomed to being in command of every situation. Forge said you wanted to talk, said it was important. Ren took a breath, feeling the protest of her healing ribs. I know where Harlan is going. The words hung in the air between them. Ezra's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes, a sharpening of focus like a predator catching a scent. Talk to me. You're looking for him in Portland, in the places where a man like him would normally hide. Flop houses, drug dens, the homes of associates. Ren shook her head slightly. He's not there. He's too smart for that. He knows you're looking, and he knows he can't hide in his usual haunts. So where is he? When I was living on the east side before I found the alley behind the nail and heard things. Rumors about a place outside the city where people could go when they needed to disappear. A compound run by a group called the Black Reapers. Ezra's face went very still. You know them, Ren said. It was not a question. I know them. Meth cookers and gun runners, nasty piece of work named Nash Corbett runs the operation. We've had territory disputes with them for years. Harlan talked about them once, back when he was shaking me down for protection money. He said he had connections there that if things ever got too hot in the city, he could buy his way into their compound and wait out the storm. Ren met Ezra's eyes directly. That's where he is. I'd bet my life on it. A long silence stretched between them. Ezra's fingers drummed slowly on the arm of his chair, a rhythmic tapping that seemed to help him think. Even if you're right, he said finally, it doesn't change the situation. The Reaper's compound is a fortress. Armed guards, cameras, dogs. Going in there means war, and war brings heat. Federal heat. A TF FBI, the whole alphabet soup. I know. The club has rules, procedures. We don't start wars over personal grudges. This isn't personal. Wren's voice was steady, but something fierce burned behind her pale blue eyes. Harlan didn't just attack Forge. He attacked a patched member of the Hells Angels. He tried to take his colors. In your world, that's not personal. That's existential. Ezra studied her for a long moment, and Wren had the uncomfortable sensation of being evaluated, weighed, measured against some internal standard she could not see. Forge told me you were sharp, Ezra said finally. He didn't mention you understood club politics. I've been watching, listening. You don't survive 4 years on the streets without learning how to read power structures. And what else have you learned watching and listening? Wren hesitated. This was the moment, the point of no return. Once she said what she was about to say, there would be no taking it back. I've learned that Harlan didn't just run to the Reapers for protection. He bought his way in with something valuable. She paused. Information. About me. Ezra's eyes narrowed. Explain. Think about it. A small-time thug like Harlan doesn't have the money to buy protection from a crew like the Black Reapers. What he has is information. He knows the streets. He knows who's vulnerable and where they sleep. And now he knows about me. The implication hung heavy in the air. He told them about you, Ezra said slowly, working through the logic. The girl who saved a Hell's Angel. The girl who's now under club protection. I know every corner of Portland where a homeless person can sleep safely. I know which cops take bribes and which shelters are fronts for human trafficking. I know things that would be valuable to someone running a criminal operation. Wren's hands clenched in the hospital sheets. Harlan is selling me to the Reapers, not literally, not yet, but he's using me as bait. He's telling them that if they keep him safe, he'll deliver information about how to get to me, and through me, how to hurt you. The silence that followed was absolute. Ezra sat motionless, his face a mask of controlled fury. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and cold, as a blade drawn from ice. You're certain of this. It's what I would do if I were him. It's the only play that makes sense. Ezra rose from his chair and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot full of motorcycles. His hands were clasped behind his back, his posture rigid with tension. If you're right, this changes things. The Reapers harboring Harlan is one thing. The Reapers actively participating in a scheme to hurt someone under our protection is something else entirely. I know. He turned back to face her. I need to call church. The brothers need to hear this. I want to be there. The words came out before Wren could stop them. Ezra's eyebrows rose slightly. Church is for patched members only. It's one of our oldest traditions. I'm not asking to join your club. I'm asking to speak, to present my case directly to the people who will be deciding what happens next. And why should I allow that? Wren met his gaze without flinching. Because I'm not just a victim here. I'm a witness. I'm the one with information about Harlan and his connection to the Reapers. And I'm the one who's going to be living with the consequences of whatever decision you make. She took a breath, wincing at the pain in her ribs. You said I was family now. Family doesn't get excluded from decisions that affect their lives. For a long moment, Ezra simply looked at her. Then slowly a thin smile crossed his weathered face. Forge was right about you. You've got steel in your spine. He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Church meets tomorrow night at the clubhouse, 8 o'clock. I'll send someone to bring you. But Wren, his eyes hardened. What you see there, what you hear there, it stays there. Forever. You understand? Oh, I understand. Ezra nodded once and left. Wren sagged back against her pillows, suddenly exhausted. The conversation had taken more out of her than she had expected. But beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred. Something that felt almost like hope. She was not a ghost anymore. She was not invisible. For the first time in her life, she was about to have a voice. The clubhouse of the Portland Hells Angels chapter was a converted warehouse on the industrial east side of the city. From the outside, it looked like any other anonymous building in the district, its brick facade weathered and unremarkable. But the security cameras mounted at strategic angles and the heavy steel door that required 3 different keys to open told a different story. Wren arrived in the back of a black SUV, still wearing a hospital gown under the leather jacket that Forge had insisted she borrow. Her ribs screamed in protest at every bump in the road, but she gritted her teeth and said nothing. She had asked for this. She would see it through. The interior of the clubhouse was a revelation. Whatever she had expected, it was not this. The main room was random and surprisingly well appointed, with leather couches arranged around a massive stone fireplace, a fully stocked bar along one wall, and dozens of photographs documenting the chapter's history. Pool tables occupied one corner. A jukebox stood silent in another. The walls were decorated with club memorabilia plaques and trophies and flags from chapters around the world. But it was the long oak table in the center of the room that commanded attention. It was clearly old, the wood scarred and stained from decades of use. Carved into its surface was the Hells Angels Death Head logo, the winged skull staring up at the ceiling with empty eyes. Around this table sat nearly 30 men, their cuts displaying patches that spoke of ranks and positions Wren was only beginning to understand. Every eye in the room turned to her as she entered, supported by Forge on one side. The weight of their collective attention was almost physical. These were not the gentle, concerned visitors who had come to her hospital room bearing flowers and books. These were outlaws in their element, gathered for the serious business of deciding matters of life and death. Their faces were hard, their postures alert, their eyes measuring her with the cold calculation of men who had learned to assess threats in a fraction of a second. Ezra stood at the head of the table, his silver beard gleaming in the overhead lights. "Brothers, you all know why we're here. One of our own was attacked. The man responsible has fled to the Black Reaper's compound, seeking protection from the consequences of his actions." A low rumble of anger circled the table. "We've been debating our response for over a week now. Some of you want to ride on the compound immediately and drag this rat out by his throat. Others counsel patience, arguing that war with the Reapers would bring heat we can't afford." He gestured toward Wren. "This is Wren Gallagher, the woman who saved Forge's life. She has information that may change how we approach this situation. I've given her permission to speak." The rumbling grew louder. Wren heard fragments of protest. Civilians at church, against tradition. Don't care what she did. Ezra raised a hand and the room fell silent. "I've made my decision. Anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me after. For now, you'll listen to what she has to say." He nodded to Wren. She stepped forward, acutely aware of how small she must look in this room full of giants. Her legs trembled slightly, whether from weakness or nerves she could not tell. But her voice when she spoke was steady. "I know Harlan Slade. Not as well as some of you know your enemies, but well enough. 2 years ago, he beat me half to death because I couldn't pay his protection fee. So I understand why you want him. I want him too." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "You've been looking for him in all the wrong places. Harlan isn't stupid. He's a coward and a bully, but he's not stupid. He knew within hours of the attack that he'd made a fatal mistake, and he ran to the only place he thought you couldn't reach him. The Reaper's compound," someone said. "Yes, but it's not just about hiding. Harlan didn't have enough money to buy protection from Nash Corbett. What he had was information about me." The room went very still. "He's telling the Reapers that I know things, that because I've lived on the streets for 4 years, I have information that would be valuable to their operation. Drug routes, police patrol patterns, vulnerable targets." She swept her gaze around the table, meeting the eyes of as many men as she could. "He's using me as currency, and as long as he's useful to the Reapers, they'll keep protecting him." Barrett, the vice president, leaned forward. He was a heavy-set man with a shaved head and a beard that reached his chest. "So what are you suggesting, that we just let him sit there until the Reapers get tired of him?" "No, I'm suggesting that we change the calculation." "How?" Wren took a breath. "Harlan lied to the Reapers. He told them he got into a fight with a biker and came out on top. A victory story, something that makes him look tough, valuable." She gestured to her own battered face. "He didn't tell them the truth. He didn't tell them that he attacked from behind, that he needed 4 men to take on one, that when his ambush failed, he beat a 90-pound homeless girl until her lung collapsed." Understanding dawned on several faces around the table. "Nash Corbett is a monster," Wren continued. "But he runs a business. And businesses don't survive by attracting federal attention. If the FBI starts asking questions about the attempted murder of a civilian woman, someone who had nothing to do with club politics, that's exactly the kind of heat that could bring down everything he's built. She squared her shoulders, ignoring the protest of her ribs. I want to go with you when you confront the Reapers. I want to stand in front of Nash Corbett and show him exactly what Harlan Slade did. I want to be the evidence that proves Harlan lied. The room erupted. Men were on their feet shouting over each other. Some were arguing against the plan, calling it reckless, dangerous, a violation of every protocol. Others were surprisingly supportive, pointing out that Wren's presence would indeed change the dynamic of any confrontation. Through it all, Forge remained silent, his eyes fixed on Wren with an expression she could not quite read. Ezra let the chaos run for perhaps 30 seconds before raising his hand again. Enough. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. We're not animals. We discuss. We debate. We vote. That's how this works. He turned to Wren. You understand what you're asking. The Reaper's compound is not a hospital room. These are violent men who wouldn't hesitate to hurt you if they thought it served their interests. I understand. And you're willing to take that risk. Wren thought about the alley, about the crowbar descending toward Forge's skull, about the decision she had made in that fraction of a second, the decision that had led her to this room, this moment, this impossible crossroads. I've been taking risks my whole life, she said quietly. The difference is, this time I'm choosing the risk. This time it means something. Ezra studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to the table. The question before this church is whether to ride on the Black Reaper's compound to extract Harlan Slade and whether to bring Wren Gallagher as part of that operation. He paused. All those in favor. Hands rose around the table. Wren counted silently. 23, 24, 25. All those opposed, 4 hands. Not enough to change the outcome. Motion carries. Ezra's voice was formal ritual. We ride tomorrow night. Wren comes with us. He turned to Forge. She's your responsibility. Keep her safe or answer to me. Forge nodded once. Understood. The meeting dissolved into smaller conversations as men broke into groups to discuss logistics. Wren found herself suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation draining away and leaving only the bone-deep weariness of a body still struggling to heal. Forge appeared at her side, his hand gentle on her elbow. Come on, you need to rest. Did I do the right thing? The question came out before she could stop it. Forge looked down at her, his weathered face softening. You did what you thought was right. In my experience, that's all anyone can do. He guided her toward the door, but they were stopped by a voice from behind. Maidan. Wren, she turned. Ezra stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. What you did tonight took courage. The kind of courage that most people never find no matter how long they live. He paused. You're going to need more of it tomorrow. Whatever happens at that compound, whatever you see, you keep your head down and let us handle it. Understood. Understood. Ezra nodded and turned away. Wren let Forge lead her out into the cold night air where the black SUV waited to take her back to the hospital. But she knew with a certainty that settled into her bones like the November chill that she was not going to keep her head down. She had not come this far to be a passive observer. Tomorrow she would face the man who had tried to destroy her, and she would show him exactly what she was made of. The Black Reaper's compound sat at the end of a rutted dirt road 15 miles outside of Portland in a stretch of forest that civilization had forgotten. It had once been a logging operation, the rusted hulks of ancient machinery still scattered among the trees like mechanical corpses. Now it was a fortress ringed by chain-link fencing, topped with razor wire, watched over by security cameras, and patrolled by men with assault rifles and dogs trained to kill. The convoy approached just after midnight. 60 motorcycles moving in tight formation, their headlights cutting through the fog like the eyes of predators on the hunt. Behind them came 3 black SUVs, their windows tinted, their occupants invisible to the outside world. Wren sat in the back of the lead SUV, wedged between Forge and another biker, whose name she had not caught. She wore the borrowed leather jacket over a black t-shirt, her hospital bracelet still visible on her wrist, because she had refused to let anyone remove it. The bandages on her face had been reduced to simple butterfly strips. but the bruising remained a vivid purple and yellow map of violence that was exactly the evidence she needed. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain the men beside her could hear it, but her hands were steady and her breathing was controlled. She had spent the hours since the church meeting preparing herself for this moment, visualizing every possible scenario, steeling herself against the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. The convoy stopped 100 yards from the compound's main gate. Engines died in sequence, and in the sudden silence, Wren could hear the distant barking of dogs and the low hum of generators. Ezra dismounted from his motorcycle and walked toward the gate with the unhurried confidence of a man who feared nothing. Behind him, the Hells Angels arranged themselves in a loose semicircle, a wall of leather and chrome, and barely contained violence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then floodlights snapped on, bathing the scene in harsh white light. A door opened in the compound's main building, and figures began to emerge. Nash Corbett was smaller than Wren had expected. After hearing stories about the leader of the Black Reapers, she had imagined a giant, a monster in human form. Instead, she saw a lean, wiry man with a shaved head and a face that seemed to be composed entirely of sharp angles. But his eyes, when they caught the light, held a cold intelligence that was far more frightening than mere physical size. He was flanked by 4 men carrying AR-15 rifles, their fingers resting on the trigger guards with practiced ease. Ezra Thorne, Nash's voice carried across the distance between them, calm and almost amused. 60 bikes must be important. You know why I'm here? I can guess. Nash's lips curled into a thin smile. You want the rat, Slade. He attacked one of my brothers, tried to take his colors. You know what that means. I know what it means to you. What I don't know is why I should care. Nash spread his hands in a gesture of mock helplessness. As Slade paid for sanctuary, I took his money. That's business. He lied to you. Everyone lies to me. It's practically a job requirement in this line of work. Ezra turned and gestured toward the SUV. Forge opened the door and helped Wren out, supporting her as she walked toward the gate on legs that trembled with each step. The reaction from the Reapers was immediate. Rifles came up, men shouted warnings, dogs strained at their leashes. But Wren kept walking, her eyes fixed on Nash Corbett, until she stood just behind Ezra, fully visible in the harsh glare of the floodlights. Nash's expression shifted. The amusement faded, replaced by something that might have been surprise. What is this? This is what Harlan Slade didn't tell you about. Ezra's voice was ice. Take a good look. Wren stepped forward into the no man's land between the two groups. She felt exposed, vulnerable, a small, fragile thing surrounded by men who could snuff out her life without a moment's hesitation. But she did not stop. She walked until she was close enough to see the fine lines around Nash Corbett's eyes, close enough to smell the cigarette smoke on his clothes. My name is Wren Gallagher, she said, and her voice did not shake. I'm 22 years old. I weigh 93 pounds. I've been homeless for 4 years. She pointed to her face, to the bruises that painted her skin in shades of violence. Harlan Slade did this to me. He kicked me in the ribs until 3 of them broke. He stomped on my chest until my lung collapsed. He beat me while I lay on the ground, unable to defend myself, because I tried to stop him from killing a man from behind. Nash said nothing. His eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He told you he won a fight. He told you he stood toe-to-toe with a Hell's Angel and came out on top. Wren shook her head slowly. He lied. He ambushed a man with 3 friends and a crowbar, and when his plan fell apart, he took out his frustration on the smallest target available. She gestured to herself. This is what your guest really is. A coward who beats women. A liar who can't even tell the truth about his own crimes. She took another step forward, close enough now that Nash could have reached out and grabbed her. I don't know what promises he made you. I don't know what information he claims to have. But I do know this: every cop, every federal agent, every journalist in the Pacific Northwest is going to be very interested in the story of how a 90-pound homeless girl almost died because some meth-dealing bikers gave sanctuary to the man who beat her. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Is he worth that heat? Mr. Corbett, is one lying coward worth the attention that's going to come down on this compound when my story gets out? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the dogs had stopped barking, as if the animals themselves sensed the weight of the moment. Nash Corbett looked at Wren for a long time. Then his gaze shifted to Ezra, to the 60 armed bikers standing behind him, to the faces of his own men, who were beginning to look uncertain. "You've got guts, girl," Nash said finally. "I'll give you that." "I didn't come here for compliments." Something that might have been a smile flickered across Nash's face. "No, I don't suppose you did." He turned to one of his men and spoke quietly. The man nodded and disappeared into the compound. The waiting stretched on minutes that felt like hours, tension humming in the air like a live wire. Then the door opened again, and 2 Reapers emerged, dragging a struggling figure between them. Harlan Slade looked nothing like the predator who had haunted Wren's nightmares for 2 years. His face was pale and sweaty, his eyes wide with terror. He was babbling, pleading, promising anything if they would just let him go. When he saw Wren standing in the floodlights, he went completely still. "You, he whispered. "Me." The Reapers dragged Harlan to the gate and shoved him through. He stumbled, fell to his knees in the mud, and did not get up. Nash Corbett looked at Ezra. "We're square. This piece of garbage lied his way into my compound, brought heat to my operation. He's your problem now." Ezra nodded once. "We're square." Nash turned and walked back toward the compound without another word. His men followed the rifles, lowering the dogs, being led away. Within moments, the Reapers had disappeared inside, and the floodlights snapped off, plunging the scene into darkness, broken only by the headlights of the motorcycles. Wren looked down at Harlan Slade kneeling in the mud at her feet, the man who had beaten her, the man who had tried to kill Forge, the man who had spent 2 weeks hiding behind others, too cowardly to face the consequences of his actions. "You should have killed me in that alley," she said softly. "It would have been cleaner for you." Harlan looked up at her, and there was nothing in his eyes but fear. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll give you money, information, whatever you want. Just don't let them." "I'm not going to let them do anything." Wren crouched down, ignoring the pain in her ribs until her face was level with his. "I'm going to watch." She stood and walked back to the SUV without looking back. Behind her, Forge stepped forward, his massive shadow falling over the kneeling man like a shroud. They did not kill Harlan Slade. Death, Forge explained later, was a mercy, a quick end to suffering, a release from the consequences of one's actions. What Harlan had done demanded something more lasting, something that would remind him every day for the rest of his life of the mistake he had made. They took him to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The building had been empty for years, its windows boarded up, its interior thick with dust and the smell of decay. It was the kind of place where bad things happened to people who had made bad choices. Wren did not go inside. She sat in the SUV, staring at the dashboard, listening to the muffled sounds that filtered through the walls. She had said she would watch, but when the moment came, she found that she could not. What she heard was enough. When Forge finally emerged, his knuckles were raw and bloody. He climbed into the SUV beside her and sat in silence for a long moment, his breathing slowly returning to normal. "It's done." "What did you do to him?" Forge looked at his hands. "I broke them, both of them, every bone, every joint. He'll never hold a weapon again, never make a fist, never hurt anyone the way he hurt you." Wren closed her eyes. She had expected to feel satisfaction, vindication, some sense of justice served. Instead, she felt empty. "Is that enough?" she asked quietly. "Does it balance the scales?" Forge was silent for a long time. "Nothing ever balances the scales completely. Not really. The best we can do is make sure the people who hurt us can't hurt anyone else." He paused. He's going to spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. Every time he sees a motorcycle, every time he hears an engine, he's going to remember this night. That's the price of what he did. And the police? They'll find him in a few hours, tied to a lamppost outside the precinct with a written confession taped to his chest. The extortion ring he's been running, the people he's hurt, it's all there. He's going to prison for a long time. Wren opened her eyes and looked out at the warehouse. "I thought I'd feel different. I thought I'd feel like something was finished." Forge reached over and took her hand. His grip was gentle, despite the blood on his knuckles. "Some things don't finish, Wren. They just become part of who you are. The question is whether you let them break you or make you stronger." She thought about that for a long moment, about the alley and the hospital and the church meeting, about standing in front of Nash Corbett and refusing to be afraid, about the person she had been 2 weeks ago and the person she was becoming. "Take me home," she said finally. Forge started the engine. Which home? Wren considered the question. The hospital room that had become her refuge. The alley behind the Rusty Nail where she had spent 8 months trying to be invisible. The apartment that the club had promised her, waiting somewhere in the city for a life she had not yet begun to build. "The clubhouse," she said. "I want to be around family." Forge smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "You got it." The SUV pulled away from the warehouse, leaving the darkness behind. Ahead, the lights of Portland glittered in the distance like a promise waiting to be kept. Wren Gallagher had come to this city with nothing. A torn canvas bag and the clothes on her back, in a desperate hope that she might survive long enough to see another sunrise. Now she had something more. She had brothers who would fight for her. A place where she belonged. A future that was not defined by mere survival. The hunt was over. The scales, if not balanced, were at least acknowledged, and somewhere in the cold November night, the woman who had once been a ghost was finally learning what it meant to be seen. 2 years is not a long time in the grand scheme of human existence. It is a blink of an eye in geological terms, a footnote in the history of civilizations, barely enough time for a child to learn to speak in complete sentences. But for Wren Gallagher, the 24 months that followed that cold November night might as well have been a lifetime. The woman who emerged on the other side bore little resemblance to the 90-pound ghost who had once slept behind dumpsters and counted survival by the hour. The first year had been about healing. Not just the physical wounds, though those took longer than anyone expected. The broken ribs knitted slowly, complicated by years of malnutrition that had left her bones brittle and her immune system compromised. The punctured lung healed but left her with a persistent ache on cold mornings, a reminder that some damage never fully disappears. The broken nose was reset by a surgeon the club paid for, leaving a faint scar across the bridge that she refused to have removed. The scars were important. They were proof that she had survived. But the deeper healing, the kind that could not be measured by x-rays or blood tests, that took longer still. There were nights when she woke in a cold sweat, certain that she was back in the alley, certain that the warmth and safety around her were nothing but a cruel dream. There were days when the kindness of the brothers overwhelmed her, when she had to excuse herself to the bathroom and grip the sink with white knuckles until the urge to run subsided. Trust did not come easily to someone who had spent 4 years learning that trust was a weakness to be exploited. But slowly and incrementally she learned. She learned that when Forge said he would be somewhere, he was there. She learned that when Ezra made a promise, he kept it. She learned that the brothers who stopped by her hospital room and later her apartment were not looking for anything in return. They simply wanted to make sure she was okay. It was a foreign language, this dialect of unconditional acceptance. But Wren had always been a quick study, and eventually she became fluent. The apartment they had set up for her was modest by most standards, but palatial compared to anything she had ever known. 2 rooms on the 3rd floor of a converted brownstone with a real bed and a kitchen that actually worked, and windows that looked out over a quiet street where children played on summer evenings. She spent the first week simply walking from room to room, touching the walls, opening and closing the cabinets, unable to believe that this space was hers. The money in the bank account remained largely untouched. She did not know what to do with $47,000. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life, more than she could conceptualize spending. She used a small portion to buy clothes that fit properly, to stock the refrigerator with food that did not come from dumpsters, to purchase a phone that allowed her to stay connected to her new family. The rest sat in the account, a safety net against the possibility that all of this might somehow be taken away. By the end of the first year, she had gained 15 pounds and learned to sleep through the night more often than not. She had gotten her GED, studying in the quiet hours of the morning with a determination that surprised even herself. She had started working part-time at the Rusty Nail, first washing dishes, then serving drinks, learning the rhythms of the bar that had once been the backdrop to her invisible existence. The second year was about building. It started with a conversation she had not expected. Ezra had come to the bar one evening, not for a drink, but to talk. He had settled into a booth in the back corner, ordered a coffee, and waited for her to finish her shift. When she finally slid into the seat across from him, exhaustion pulling at her edges, He had looked at her with those calculating eyes and asked a question that changed everything. "What do you want to do with your life, Wren?" No one had ever asked her that before. In the foster homes, the question had been what she was supposed to do, what was expected of her, what would cause the least trouble. On the streets, the only question was how to survive until tomorrow. But here in this bar that smelled of stale beer and cigarette smoke, the president of a motorcycle club was asking what she wanted. "I don't know," she had admitted. "I never thought I'd live long enough to have to answer that question." Ezra had nodded slowly as if this was exactly the answer he expected. "This bar," he said, gesturing around at the worn booths in the scratched hardwood floor. "The owner is looking to sell. Health problems. He wants out, and he wants to make sure the place goes to someone who will take care of it." Wren had frowned, not understanding where he was going. "The club has been thinking about acquiring some legitimate businesses. Places where the brothers can gather without attracting unwanted attention. Places that generate clean income." He paused. "This bar has history. It's neutral ground. It's important to a lot of people." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to run it." The words had hung in the air between them, impossible and enormous. "I don't know anything about running a business." "You'll learn. You're smart, you're observant, and you know this bar better than anyone. You know its rhythms, its regulars, its problems." Ezra had leaned forward slightly. "More importantly, you have something that can't be taught. You have the respect of every man in this club. They watched you stand up in church and demand to be heard. They watched you face down Nash Corbett without flinching. They know what you're made of." I was terrified. "Of course you were. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else is more important." He had paused. "The club will buy the bar, we'll rename it, rebrand it, make it officially ours, but the day-to-day operations, the management, the decisions that need to be made, that would be you, your job, your responsibility, your future." Wren had sat in silence for a long time, turning the offer over in her mind. A bar. Her bar for all practical purposes. A place where she belonged, not as a charity case or a protected dependent, but as someone who contributed, who mattered, who had a role to play. "Why me?" she had asked finally. "There must be 100 guys in the club who would kill for this opportunity." Ezra had smiled then, a rare expression that softened the hard lines of his face. "Because none of them saved one of my best men with nothing but their bare hands and a willingness to die for a stranger. Because none of them have the perspective, you have the understanding of what it means to have nothing and to build something from the wreckage. Because you have already proven that you're willing to do the hard thing when it matters." He had stood, dropping a 20 on the table for his untouched coffee. "Think about it. Let me know by the end of the week." She had not needed the week. By the time he reached the door, she had made her decision. "Yes." Ezra had turned, eyebrows raised. "I want to do it. I want to run the bar." A nod, a ghost of a smile, and he was gone. But in that moment, Wren Gallagher's life changed direction for the second time, pivoting away from mere survival and towards something that resembled a future. The renovation took 3 months. The club brought in contractors to update the wiring, the plumbing, the kitchen equipment. They tore out the old bar and installed a new one, solid mahogany that gleamed under the lights. They replaced the worn booths with comfortable leather seating and upgraded the sound system, and put in proper ventilation so that the place did not constantly reek of cigarette smoke. But the most significant change was the name. The rusty nail had served its purpose, but this was a new chapter, and new chapters deserved new beginnings. After considerable debate among the brothers, they settled on a name that honored the man whose life Wren had saved, while acknowledging the woman who had done the saving. They called it the Forge. In metallurgy, a forge is where raw metal is heated and shaped, where impurities are burned away and strength is hammered into existence. It is a place of transformation, of violence, in service of creation. The name suited the bar perfectly, and it suited Wren as well. She moved into the apartment above the establishment, a space that had been used for storage, but was now converted into comfortable living quarters. It was smaller than her previous apartment, but felt more like home. She was directly above the bar, connected to it in a way that felt right. She could hear the muffled bass of the jukebox through the floor at night, could smell the kitchen when the morning prep began, could feel the vibrations of the crowd on busy evenings. The irony was not lost on her. 2 years ago, she had slept in the alley behind this very building, invisible and forgotten, counting herself lucky if the exhaust vents kept her warm enough to survive until morning. Now she lived above it, and it shaped its destiny as surely as any blacksmith shaped iron. On a Friday night in late November, exactly 2 years after the night that had changed everything, the forge was packed to capacity. Classic rock thundered from the new speakers. Pool balls cracked against each other in the corner. The smell of beer and whiskey and leather filled the air, familiar and comforting. Wren moved behind the bar with an efficiency born of countless hours of practice. She knew every regular by name, knew their preferred drinks and their personal stories, knew which ones were going through divorces and which ones had just welcomed grandchildren. She had become the heart of this place, the central node through which all social interaction flowed. She looked different now than she had 2 years ago. The gauntness was gone, replaced by healthy curves that came from regular meals and an exercise routine she had developed out of a desperate need to feel strong. Her blonde hair, once matted and dull, was cut short and practical, easy to maintain during long shifts. Her arms showed the lean muscle of someone who spent her days hauling kegs and breaking up the occasional disagreement. But it was her eyes that had changed the most. The wariness was still there, probably would always be there. But it was tempered now by confidence, by the knowledge that she had earned her place in this world through blood and courage and sheer stubborn refusal to be broken. The door opened, letting in a gust of cold November air and a figure that did not belong. Wren noticed him immediately. After 4 years on the streets, she had developed an instinct for trouble, a sixth sense that prickled at the back of her neck when something was wrong. The man who had just entered was young, maybe 25, with a thin face and eyes that darted nervously around the room. He wore a cheap leather jacket that was trying too hard to look expensive, and jeans that were too clean, too new, too carefully distressed. He was not a regular. He was not a biker. And he was not here for a casual drink. Wren kept working, pulling pints and making small talk, but her attention never left the newcomer. He took a seat at the far end of the bar, as far from the other patrons as possible, and ordered a whiskey that he did not drink. His hands were shaking slightly. His eyes kept flicking toward the door. He was waiting for someone. The realization sent a cold spike of adrenaline through Wren's chest, but she kept her expression neutral. She had learned to control her reactions, to project calm, even when every instinct screamed at her to run. Running was what the old Wren would have done. The new Wren faced her problems head on. She made her way down the bar, collecting empty glasses until she was close enough to speak to the nervous young man without being overheard. "You look like you could use a friend." He startled, nearly knocking over his untouched whiskey. "What? No, I'm fine, just waiting for someone." "Sure." Wren leaned against the bar, her posture casual, but her eyes sharp. "Thing is, I know everyone who comes through that door. I know their names, their habits, their favorite drinks, and I don't know you." The young man's face went pale. "That's not a problem," Wren continued, her voice soft and reasonable. "We get new customers all the time. But new customers who sit in the corner with shaking hands and order drinks, they don't touch those customers, usually have stories. And in my experience, those stories usually end badly for someone." She straightened, reaching under the bar to retrieve a clean glass. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me why you're really here, and I'm going to decide whether you walk out that door on your own or whether my friends help you find your way." The young man's eyes went wide. His gaze flickered to the bikers scattered around the bar, to the leather cuts and the tattoos and the casual menace that filled the room. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "I didn't want to come here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They made me." "Who made you?" Before he could answer, the door opened again. 3 men entered in quick succession. They were older than the nervous young man, harder, with the lean and hungry look of street predators who had learned to survive by taking what they wanted from those too weak to resist. Wren recognized the type instantly. She had spent 4 years navigating around men exactly like them. But it was the 4th man who made her blood run cold. He was smaller than the others, wiry and quick, with a face that had been rearranged by violence more than once. His nose was crooked, his cheekbone bore a scar that pulled at the corner of his eye, and his hands were wrapped in dirty bandages that spoke of recent injury. Wren did not recognize his face, but she recognized his eyes. Mean little eyes set too close together, burning with the particular cruelty of a man who enjoyed causing pain. Harlan Slade's eyes. This was not Harlan himself. Harlan was rotting in a federal prison somewhere. His hands permanently ruined his empire, dismantled his name, a cautionary tale whispered in the dark corners of Portland's underworld. But this man had the same look, the same predatory hunger. He was Harlan's legacy, his lieutenant perhaps, or a family member, someone who had inherited the grudge along with the remnants of Harlan's operation. The four men spread out as they entered, taking positions that blocked the exits. Their movements were practiced, coordinated. They had done this before. The bar fell silent. The jukebox kept playing, but conversations died as the regulars noticed the new arrivals. Tension crackled through the air, like static electricity before a storm. Wren did not move from her position behind the bar. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her temples, but her hands remained steady, her expression calm. "Gentlemen," her voice carried clearly across the room. "Welcome to the Forge. What can I get you?" The man with Harlan's eyes stepped forward, a cruel smile twisting his scarred face. "You know what we want. You're the one who put my brother in prison. You're the one who ruined his hands. You're the one who destroyed everything he built. Your brother tried to kill someone I care about. He beat me half to death. He made his choices, and those choices had consequences." Consequences? The man spat the word like a curse. "You want to talk about consequences? Let me tell you about consequences. My brother can't feed himself anymore, can't dress himself, can't do anything without help. He's going to spend the rest of his life like that. That because of you." Wren felt the familiar ache in her ribs, the ghost of pain that never fully disappeared. He did that to himself when he picked up a crowbar and tried to murder someone from behind. I just made sure he couldn't do it again. The man's face contorted with rage. He took another step forward, and his companions followed, tightening the noose. "You think you're safe here. You think these bikers are going to protect you. There's 4 of us, and what, maybe a dozen of them. Half of them look too old to throw a punch, and the other half are too drunk to stand up straight." Wren glanced around the room. The man was not entirely wrong. It was a quiet Friday early in the evening, and the bar was not at full capacity. The brothers who were present were mostly older members, veterans of the club, who had earned the right to spend their evenings drinking in peace rather than patrolling the streets. They were watching the confrontation with alert eyes, but they were also outnumbered and caught off guard. This was her problem, her bar, her responsibility. Wren took a slow breath, feeling the familiar calm settle over her. The same calm she had felt in the alley when she had made the decision to save a stranger. The same calm she had felt facing Nash Corbett at the gates of his compound. Fear was present, of course, a cold knot in her stomach that would never fully unclench. But fear was just information. It told you that something mattered. It did not get to make the decisions. "You're right," she said quietly. "There are 4 of you. And if you wanted to, you could probably hurt me before anyone in this room could stop you." The man with Harlan's eyes grinned, showing teeth that were yellowed and crooked. "Smart girl. But here's the thing you're not considering." Wren reached slowly, deliberately into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "This bar doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to 500 men who have sworn to protect it and everyone in it. And right now, they're all exactly 1 phone call away." She held up the phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. "You've got about 30 seconds to decide how this ends. You can walk out that door right now, disappear into whatever hole you crawled out of, and never show your face in this city again. Or you can stay and find out exactly what happens when you threaten someone under the protection of the Hells Angels." The man hesitated. His eyes flicked to his companions, to the bikers around the room, to the phone in Wren's hand. "You're bluffing. Try me." She pressed the button. For a long moment, nothing happened. The jukebox continued to play. The tension continued to build. The man with Harlan's eyes took another step forward, his hand moving toward the waistband of his jeans. And then from outside came a sound that every person in that bar recognized. The thunder of a Harley-Davidson engine roaring to life, followed by another, and another, and another. The man froze. His hand stopped its movement toward his waistband. His face went pale as the sound grew louder, building into a chorus of mechanical fury that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Ren smiled. I wasn't bluffing. The door burst open and Forge filled the frame. He was wearing his cut, his face set in hard lines, his eyes blazing with a fury that promised violence. Behind him, visible through the open door, were at least a dozen more bikers, their engines still running, their headlights cutting through the darkness like the eyes of predators. You've got 5 seconds to get out of this bar, Forge said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. After that, I stopped being polite. The man with Harlan's eyes looked at Ren, looked at Forge, looked at the wall of leather and chrome that had materialized out of the night like an avenging army. He made the smart choice. This isn't over, he snarled, even as he backed toward the door. Yes, it is. Ren's voice was calm, final. Your brother made a mistake, and he paid for it. If you come back here, if you ever threaten this place or the people in it, again, you'll pay for it too. And I promise you the price will be higher than you can afford. The 4 men fled into the night. The nervous young man, the one who had been waiting for them, tried to follow, but Barrett caught him by the collar and held him fast. Not you. You've got some questions to answer. Ren sagged against the bar as the tension drained out of her. Her legs were trembling. Her hands were shaking. The calm that had sustained her through the confrontation was evaporating, leaving behind the raw, ragged edges of adrenaline and fear. Forge was at her side in an instant. You okay? I'm fine, she managed a weak smile. Just not used to being threatened on a Friday night. How'd you know to call? Ren held up her phone, showing the contact she had pressed. I didn't know, I hoped. She took a shaky breath. I've had you on speed dial for 2 years, Forge. Every day I tell myself I probably won't need it, and every day I'm glad it's there. Forge put a massive hand on her shoulder, steadying her. You handled that like a pro. Most people would have panicked. I learned from the best. The bar was returning to normal. Brothers were settling back into their seats. Conversations were resuming. The jukebox was playing a song about highways and freedom. But there was a new energy in the room, a collective awareness that something significant had just happened. Ren had faced down a threat without waiting to be saved. She had stood her ground, made her play, and come out on top. In the eyes of the men around her, she had just passed a test she had not known she was taking. An hour later, when the excitement had died down and the bar was approaching closing time, Ezra Thorne walked through the door. He was accompanied by 2 prospects and carrying a large flat package wrapped in brown paper. Ezra nodded to Forge, exchanged brief words with a few of the brothers, and then made his way to the bar, where Ren was closing out the register. I heard you had some visitors tonight. Word travels fast. It always does. Ezra settled onto a bar stool, his silver beard catching the light. Barrett's talking to the kid they left behind. Apparently he was just hired to scout the place, didn't know what he was getting into. The 4 who came after you were Harlan Slade's old crew. His brother Marcus was leading them. Marcus, Ren tested the name. He had Harlan's eyes. He had Harlan's everything, including his stupidity, coming after someone under our protection in our bar with a handful of street thugs. Ezra shook his head. We'll find them. They won't be a problem anymore. Ren nodded slowly. She was not entirely comfortable with what that implied, but she had learned to accept that the world she now lived in operated by different rules than the ones she had known before. I didn't call for help right away, she admitted. I thought about handling it myself. I know, Forge told me. Ezra's eyes met hers. You made the right call, reaching out when you did. But you also made the right call standing your ground until help arrived. That's not an easy balance to strike. I'm still learning. We all are. Ezra gestured to the prospects who brought the wrap package forward and set it on the bar. Which brings me to why I'm here. This is for you. Ren looked at the package, her heart suddenly beating faster. What is it? Open it. She untied the twine with trembling fingers and peeled back the brown paper. Inside was a leather jacket. Not just any leather jacket, but a cut the kind worn by every member of the Hells Angels. It was black, supple, clearly custom-made to fit her smaller frame. The leather smelled new, expensive, carefully worked by hands that knew their craft. But it was the patch on the back that made Ren's breath catch in her throat. It was not the death head, the sacred emblem reserved for patch members of the club. Instead, it was a specialized rocker crimson letters arching across the shoulders on a field of white. protected by Hell's Angels, and below it, in smaller letters, guarded by Forge. Ren stared at the jacket, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Yes, you do." Ezra's voice was gentle but firm. "2 years ago, you saved one of our best. You nearly died doing it. In the time since you've proven yourself over and over. You stood up in church and demanded to be heard. You faced down Nash Corbett at the gates of his compound. You took a failing bar and turned it into the heart of our community. And tonight you stood your ground against men who wanted to hurt you without flinching, without running, without waiting for someone else to solve your problems." He reached over and touched the jacket, his fingers tracing the embroidered letters. "This isn't just a gift, Ren. It's a declaration. From this moment forward, every outlaw in the Pacific Northwest will know what this jacket means. They'll know that if they touch you, if they threaten you, if they so much as look at you wrong, they'll have 500 brothers coming for their heads." Ren lifted the jacket, feeling its weight, the quality of the leather, the craftsmanship of the stitching. "I never asked for this. The best things rarely are asked for. They're earned." Ezra stood pushing back from the bar. "Put it on." She hesitated for a moment, then slipped her arms through the sleeves. The jacket fit perfectly. It settled onto her shoulders like it had been made for her, which of course it had. The leather was warm against her skin, heavy but not restrictive. When she moved her arms, it moved with her, as natural as a second skin. Forge appeared at her side, his weathered face split by a rare, genuine smile. "Looks good on you." "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to tell me anything." Forge put his hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle despite its size. "Just wear it. Let everyone see what it means." Ezra had moved toward the door, but he paused and turned back. 500 brothers voted on this Ren. Every chapter president on the West Coast weighed in. Oakland, Seattle, Sacramento, Reno, they all agreed. His eyes met hers across the room. "You're family now, officially, permanently, and nobody, not Marcus Slade, not the Black Reapers, not anyone in this world or the next gets to change that." He left without another word, the prospects following behind him. Ren stood behind this bar, wearing the jacket that declared her status to the world, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not the physical ache of her old injuries, but something deeper, something that had been broken for so long she had forgotten it could ever be whole. She belonged. Not because she had been rescued, not because she was someone's charity case, but because she had fought for it, bled for it, earned it through courage and determination, and a stubborn refusal to be defined by her circumstances. The bar was empty now, except for Forge and a few brothers who were helping close up. Ren finished the register, wiped down the bar, and turned off the lights. The neon signs in the windows went dark, plunging the room into shadow. "Come on," Forge said. "There's one more thing I want to show you." He led her through the back door into the alley behind the bar. The November night was cold, the air sharp with the promise of frost. A light rain was falling, just enough to mist the pavement and make the neon reflections from the street shimmer like liquid fire. The dumpsters were still there, rusted and ugly. The exhaust vent still hummed its constant lukewarm breath. And in the deep recess near the concrete wall, the alcove where Ren had spent 8 months trying to be invisible, there was nothing but empty space. She walked toward it slowly, her boots crunching on the wet gravel. She stopped at the edge of the alcove and looked down at the place where she had once curled up in a rotting sleeping bag, praying for warmth, praying for safety, praying for a morning she was not always sure would come. Forge came up beside her, his massive frame blocking the wind. "You never have to look back at this place again," he said quietly. "You never have to be that person again." Ren stared at the empty alcove for a long moment. The memories were still there, still painful, still capable of reaching up from the past and wrapping cold fingers around her heart. The hunger, the fear, the bone-deep exhaustion of existing without hope. But they were memories now, not her present, not her future. "I know I don't have to look back," she said finally, "but I like to sometimes. It reminds me of something important." "What's that?" Ren turned to face him. The rain was beating on her new leather jacket, rolling off the treated surface like tears that could not find purchase. Her face was calm, her eyes clear, her posture straight and strong. "It reminds me that a single choice can change everything." That night when I saw you in this alley, when I saw Harlan raising that crowbar mom, I had a choice. Stay invisible. Stay safe. Let someone else's tragedy unfold without getting involved. Or take a risk. Do something that might get me killed for a stranger I had never met. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers small but strong against his massive palm. I chose to act. And every single thing that's happened since then, the hospital, the club, this bar, this jacket, it all came from that one choice. One moment of courage that I didn't even know I had. Forge squeezed her hand gently. You had it. You always had it. You just needed something worth fighting for. I found it. She smiled a real smile that reached her eyes and softened the hard edges of her face. I found a lot of things I didn't know I was looking for. They stood in the alley for a while longer, the rain falling softly around them, the sounds of the city muffled and distant. 2 years ago, this place had been Ren's entire world. A narrow strip of concrete between dumpsters and brick, where survival was measured in hours and hope was a luxury she could not afford. Now it was just an alley, just a place she used to live before she found somewhere better. Take me for a ride, she said suddenly. Forge raised an eyebrow. It's raining. I know, I don't care. She pulled him toward the mouth of the alley, where his Harley Davidson was parked at the curb. I want to ride through the city. I want to feel the engine under me and the wind in my face. I want everyone who sees us to know that the girl in this jacket, the one with her arms around the Hell's Angel, she's not a victim. She's not a ghost. She's exactly where she belongs. Forge looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. Pride, perhaps, or love, in whatever form that word took between two people who had been forged by violence and tempered by survival. All right, he said. Let's ride. He swung onto the bike and Ren climbed on behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. The leather of their jackets creaked as they settled against each other, two pieces of a puzzle that had somehow impossibly found their fit. Forge kicked the engine to life. The sound exploded through the quiet night like a declaration of war, like a promise, like a heartbeat amplified to shake the foundations of the world. Ren felt it in her chest, in her bones, in the deepest parts of herself that had spent so long being afraid. She was not afraid anymore. The motorcycle pulled away from the curb, accelerating into the wet Portland night. The neon lights of the city blurred past red and blue and gold, reflecting off the rain-slicked streets like a river of fire. The wind cut through Ren's hair, cold and sharp and absolutely alive. She tightened her arms around Forge and leaned into the curve as they took a corner, moving in perfect synchronization. Two bodies become one with the machine beneath them. Behind them, the alley where she had once been invisible faded into the distance. Ahead, the city stretched out in all its broken, beautiful complexity, a place of danger and opportunity, of cruelty and unexpected kindness, of people who stepped over the fallen and people who stopped to help them up. Ren Gallagher had been both kinds of people at different points in her life. She had been stepped over, ignored, forgotten. And she had chosen in one critical moment to be the person who stopped. That choice had cost her 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung. It had cost her 8 weeks in a hospital bed and months of painful recovery. It had cost her the anonymity she had cultivated for 4 years, the invisibility that had been her only protection. But it had given her something far more valuable in return. It had given her a family, a purpose, a home. It had given her the leather jacket on her back and the man whose waist she held, and the 500 brothers who would ride to the ends of the earth to keep her safe. It had given her a future she had never dared to imagine. The motorcycle roared through the night, carrying her away from the past and into whatever came next. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean, washing away the evidence of old miseries and making room for new beginnings. And Ren Gallagher, who had once been a ghost, who had once been invisible, who had once been nothing more than street trash that society stepped over on its way to somewhere else, rode into the darkness with her head held high and her heart finally completely full. She was the queen of the Portland streets. She was protected by 500 warriors. She was home.